Hello, I'm Marissa Martino of Paws Reward in Boulder, Colorado, and you're listening to the Paws Reward Podcast, where we stop and reflect on behavior change, dog training, the human-canine bond, and the relationships with our loved ones. Hello, listeners. This is going to be the last episode of the season. I almost had you there. We started season 2 in October of last year, and we will be taking a break this summer to recharge. But do not worry, we've got a lot of exciting things in the works, a lot of offerings, and the podcast will be back in August with fresh, creative episodes that I think you'll continue to love. So please stay in touch, though. Please sign up for my newsletter on my website. I've got a lot of free gifts, a lot of free resources for you to take a peek at, pawsandreward.com. Or see me over on Instagram or Facebook, Paws and Reward, and stay in touch throughout the summer. Because you know that, and I say this all the time, that I love, and so appreciate everybody for reaching out, for your ongoing support, for your reviews on Apple Podcasts, and for connecting with me and sharing with me how this content has impacted your life with your dog. I cannot tell you how much that means to me, because it often feels a little lonely when I'm just speaking into a mic. I'm sort of wondering, like, is anyone listening to this? And is this helping anyone? And so when you reach out and tell me that it is, man, that is just such reinforcement for me. So please, I'm going to ask you to keep them coming, keep those messages coming during the break, and we'll see you back in August. But I'm loving that we're going to end this season with a dear friend of mine that I'm bringing onto the show. Her name is Jenna Teti of Think Smart Dog Training, and she is a dear friend and colleague in my backyard. She is in Longmont, Colorado, and sees cases in our Boulder, Longmont area. And she also has what I think are the best homemade snuffle mats. So go to her website, thinksmartdog.com, and she's got awesome snuffle mats that are handmade. But a little bit about Jenna. She is a colleague that I call all the time. I overthink cases with. I geek out on behavior because I really trust her opinion. She's got a great behavior consultant head on her shoulders. And she's also got a ton of letters after her name. It's like alphabet soup. I can't even say all of them. But she is a really, really great resource to our profession. And I loved having this conversation with her. We dive into what the heck is a dog trainer? Like, what are all the hats that we're wearing and what all goes on behind the scenes? And I think it's an important conversation for both trainers that are entering this profession, trainers that have been in this profession for a while, realizing that, like, we're wearing a lot of hats and this is really hard work. And it's also really great for pet parents, if you're listening, to see what goes on behind the scenes and how we're trying to support all elements of your family, between you, your loved ones, your dog, and how we're trying to really cultivate a more harmonious engagement in your household. So I hope that you guys love this episode, and we will see you in season 3 in August. And again, thank you for all of your support. Hello, listeners. I am thrilled to have my dear friend and colleague, Jenna Teti of Think Smart Dog Training. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So excited to be talking to you, especially about this topic today. But before we dive into our topic, I want to let our listeners know that Jenna shares her life with her Frenchie, Reuben, and some amazing chickens. And I love Reuben so much. And I want to know what your favorite thing is about him. I can name like 10.
Oh, it's hard to choose one. I also live with a delightfully deranged cat, Maru. I didn't want her to be left out.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about Maru. I'm so
okay.
Sorry.
She has written that down in her notebook, but and
She has.
That's on you. My favorite thing about Reuben is his Mr. Mischief mode. When he is just feeling silly, and he will grab something that is quote unquote forbidden, although all of these items are now designated Ruben's items, and he will run around and throw it up in the air and prance and frolic with it. And I just love it. He's done it ever since he was a puppy, and it just fills me with joy every time he does it.
Do you think I've seen that? Like, did I see that when I gave him that gift or no?
It's different. It's he
different?
Runs from one end to the house with the item, just like a bouncing, frolicking, silly thing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's very
bouncing, frolicking potato.
Yep. Picture that, listeners.
Picture that. So cute. And Maru, my gosh, yeah, she is going to journal about me now.
Yeah, sorry.
Your cat is totally, I'm on the
You're on the list. Yeah, you are on her list now.
So Jenna and I have long talks about our profession all the time. And more recently, we were discussing what is our role as trainers and behavior consultants. And when we were having this conversation, snuggled on the couch with Ruben, we came up with so many different hats. And I was like, gosh, this is such a good podcast episode topic, because in a previous episode with Dr. Patricia McConnell, she really alluded to that, like, this is hard work. And when you say you're a dog trainer, like that title doesn't encompass like all of the hats that we're wearing all the time. So we kind of wanted to talk about a few different of those hats today. And I'm hoping that this episode will help trainers, right, that are listening, and behavior consultants realize like all the different hats that are necessary to make this work. But then also for the pet parents that are listening, like, we're doing a lot behind the scenes in order to make this relationship and your behavior and the dog's behavior work in conjunction with one another. So you want to kick this off? We've got a bunch of hats that we're wearing. So do you want to start off with one?
Yeah, I think when we talk about this, and this is something I think about often in my career, is if you had asked me growing up, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't think I would have even really known dog trainer was an option.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with dogs, not my own. I didn't get my own until I was 13, and it was an Akita, and that's a whole other story. Great first dog. For people that have not had dogs, that is not true. So please don't run out and get an Akita.
Yeah. Sarcasm.
But yes, very, very sarcastic. I think about the first dogs I really knew were my uncle's 2 golden retrievers. And their existence was, he opened the front door to the house and they got to dog. They just stepped out and dogged. Yeah. They had acres to wander. And I look back on the time, I don't think I ever saw a leash attached to them. I'm sure there was when they went to the vet for things like that.
Like 3 times a year.
Right. Yeah, 3 times a year. If that, they were on a leash. But other than that, they were doing what dogs do, sniffing, foraging, finding things. And a lot I'm not old, people. Please don't picture like a gray-haired, older woman. I make it sound like I lived in the early 1920s, but this is actually the 80s. A lot has changed since then, right? Like
so much.
And I grew up in somewhat rural New Hampshire, where that was just the norm. I mean, we had a neighborhood dog who would go from house to house to solicit food, right? Like, and we lived on a fairly busy road. And by busy, I mean, there were like maybe 10 cars a day on our road. But that was just the way it was. People didn't have fenced yards, and but that's a lot different now. I feel like, as I don't mean to get into bigger concepts, but suburbia and just things have changed a lot, and our dogs haven't really had a lot of time to adapt to that change, or had the mental capabilities to do so the ways that we have. And it's even a struggle for us, right? And so, yeah, I think our hat, the big hat is really facilitating that adaptation and facilitating that coexistence.
Yeah.
To sort of bring the dog up to speed and adapt to bring the human back to meet those needs that aren't necessarily being met day to day.
Facilitating adaptation. I love that because it reminds me of what's on the outline, right? Because this is my organization coming through. Whoever, if you know me well, you know me that I'm like crazy organizer and I always have everything organized. I'm thinking about like the word that I think of to describe something like that, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm on the right path, but like a liaison, right? It's like,
yeah,
you have needs, human being, the dog has needs, dog, right? And how can I translate for both of you what it is that you need? So it's almost like it's like an interpreter or liaison or like, and that liaison then facilitates that coexistence that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a much more organized. So if anybody knows Marissa, she's very organized. If anybody knows me, I am not. So when worlds collide is what's occurring.
Hey,
right now.
Opposites attract. And
yeah, that's right.
And there's room for all of it. I was going to say something too. I think it's really, I love the point that you bring up about how much has changed. And you were like, gosh, this was just in the 80s. It wasn't like, 1920s. I love that. Even just in the last 10 years, right? There has been so much that has changed, not only just for the dog and the pet parent, but also for us as professionals. So I want to bring up another hat that is that we as really good dog trainers and behavior consultants, we need to be lifelong learners. So lifelong learners of like what's going on in our profession, lifelong learners in the sense of how people learn and how we can teach them more appropriately so they can live more harmoniously with their dog. All things about dogs. There's so much research coming out. Like we need to be sort of like a value of mine, right? Like I need to, and I know of yours for sure, because Jenna does all the continuing ed.
All of it.
But like all of it, literally. But just having a stake in the ground in that, like, hey, we're learning as best as we can all the time. That doesn't mean that we're like experimenting on our clients in the sense that like, I'm going to take on a case I don't have any experience with, but I'm going to learn while I go. Like that is a little bit tricky in terms of, and like challenges some of the ethical lines there, but really being able to like constantly learn and be somewhat okay with that process, because learning all the time is a little uncomfortable because you sort of run up that edge of like, oh man, how I handled cases a few years ago or how I handled a case last week might be different than how I handle it this week. So you're always in this like
right
evolving place, which is really amazing and also uncomfortable.
Yeah. And it's funny you bring up the difference between now and 10 years ago. I started training 9 years ago, and I think back on my training sessions then, and it's not that I didn't have successes with my clients,
Mm-hmm.
but I look at what I did then and what I do now, and it has always been force-free, positive reinforcement based. But even within that methodology, it has morphed so much over those 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a part of me that wants to reach out to my first clients and just say thank you for being the start of my learning process. But yeah, it's ever evolving, right? And I think silly things like smartphones, right? Like before smartphones existed, there wasn't this little rectangle we were often looking at. Like I think about dogs and how they must just be like, what is that object that they don't chew on it, they don't sniff it, they just stare at it.
Mhm.
Sometimes they talk to it. Like, it just must be so weird. And like, if I were a dog, I'd be jealous of the rectangle. I don't know how I would cope with that.
Mhm.
There's a lot of time dedicated to that rectangle, and that didn't exist. I don't know, smartphones feel like they've been around forever now, but that wasn't a part of a dog's daily life up until fairly recently, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's even
Yeah.
just simple things that seem simple to us that probably impact a dog's life in
Mhm.
some way.
Mhm. Yeah, but there's this idea that you're bringing up that I really appreciate. That's like, everything is changing, right? And yeah, I think about like back to my first clients or what I used to do, or like techniques I used to implement, and we're even seeing this change in the types of cases now that we're seeing with the
Yes.
types of dogs that are being adopted out, right? Like, I mean, that
Yeah.
could be a whole nother podcast episode, right? Both Jenna and I have, my listeners know I have a lot of animal welfare experience. Jenna also does. And yeah, there's some more challenging behavior cases. And
Yes.
I'm thinking about like some of the cases I have currently where I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on for everybody involved, right? And then there is on top of that, like, or in contrast to that, I'm thinking about the Goldens that were just like, go outside, be a dog, and there's no need for a professional dog trainer because dogs were just dogging, right? And
Right.
humans were just humaning too. Like,
Yes.
there was more
Yeah.
humaning
Right.
happening then without the rectangle, potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And
Poor dogs,
yeah.
man.
Well, and if you
Poor
think
us.
about it, well, yeah, we sort of have the ability to I'm not a neuroscientist, but our brains are equipped to handle that change, or at least understand it. And dogs are a species that are somewhat bound by evolution, right? And if you think about how long that process takes,
Mm-hmm.
we're sort of pressuring them to adapt to our lives that are changing very quickly and rapidly, and saying, okay, catch up. And that's not possible for them. That's not the way that works.
Yeah, I'd even argue it's not possible for
Well,
us
yeah.
either.
If we get to,
right,
if we look at my anxiety levels,
but we can talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we can talk about it and
Right.
understand it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got liaison, facilitating, harmony.
When I think about that, a lot of my sessions I go into, and I am teaching my clients, and this isn't meant to sound condescending, but I am teaching them what a dog is and what a dog needs. And it's not, I don't fault the clients for not knowing that. I think there's a lot of forces sort of misguiding people about, there's a lot of misinformation. One hat is just sort of, hey, here's what a dog is, here's what a dog needs. Oh, that's the behavior you're seeing. Well, let's talk about how that fits into the dog's being a dog, and how we can meet, right, have that sort of meeting of the minds to facilitate that coexistence.
Yeah, it is surprising when you are with a client and you're sharing information that is just like second nature to us, and they're like, wait, what? Right? Like, there's so many light bulbs that happen because you really are teaching them about what a dog is, and what they need. And I think that when we, especially behavior consultants, like, we're going in and we're saying, like, a lot of this could potentially be a product of that the dog's needs are not being met. And so you expect me to come in and show you how to, like, quote unquote, teach behaviors, but it might actually look really different. And I think that this is a sort of one of the hats that we wear, which is that we're a trainer, that we're like teaching skills to the dog. But it's one of the many hats that we're going to talk about today, because yes, training is very, very, very important, and teaching new behaviors and skills for the dog and the human is very important. And yet it is one element, because it might be that we need to set up a management strategy and increase the exercise, and then the behavior goes away and we don't need to teach anything. Right.
Right.
And so it is, I feel like, one of the many hats, and that hat requires a lot of skill, right? Like there's like hats within that hat. Right.
Yes.
But it is not, that's why when somebody says, "Oh, this is Marissa, she's a dog trainer," I'm like, that like doesn't really encompass what it is that I do.
I cringe every time. I know you have this feeling too. I
100%.
cringe every time someone introduces me as a dog trainer, because I'm like, oh, you like I see the picture in your head and it's so
The picture is
not
obedience
accurate
or something. Yeah, the picture is
Yeah.
obedience, and maybe that's our picture, but the picture is
Right.
not this holistic approach.
Right.
Where we're looking at the humane hierarchy, we are making sure that the animal's needs are met, like that there's so many considerations that are going into this. It's not about like leave it down and stay.
And sit. Don't forget
sit. Sorry. Like the most
Yeah.
functional of behaviors.
Yeah. Like when someone introduces me as a dog trainer, I'm like, I just picture them picturing me teaching a dog to sit. And it's right. Why wouldn't they? I
Totally.
guess. But I just want to be like, no, you have no idea. You have no idea. You have no idea the hours I lay awake at night.
Yeah.
You have no idea the protocols and all the information in my brain that I have to sort through with every case. There's a lot of hats. Let's talk more about those hats. Sorry, I was taking us away from the hats again.
Well, no, I think that we're on a good topic in the sense that like, this is why I love that term behavior consultant, because
yes, yeah.
I feel like that particular term, or like it really offers more about what it is that we're doing. We are consulting about behavior, about everybody's behavior involved in the picture, and then it becomes a little bit more complex, and
everybody's behavior, which is another hat, right? Like,
which is like our behavior too, right? Our behavior as behavior consultants, and the clients, the family unit, the dog, the multiple dogs in the home, right? There's a lot of people and nervous systems to keep track of in terms of managing behavior, right? And so I looked up the word consultant just because I was like, oh, how do I want to be able to have some definitions for some of these. But consultant means like a person who provides expert advice professionally. And when I think about consulting, we are saying, okay, we're going to put up a baby gate here, or we're going to implement this enrichment strategy, or like we're giving them advice professionally. But I think a good consultant also uses coaching skills to co-create those solutions with their client, right? So that it's not just like, hey, I'm going to come in and bark orders at you. It is that like, wow, you've got a lot on your plate. How does this feel? Is this doable for a week? Is this doable for a day? Let's try this. Let's see if it works, right? That we're having a collaborative conversation with the client instead of just, here's your recipe or your protocol and that's it. And I don't really care whether you can implement it or not. Right.
Oh my God. Yeah. Right. I mean, I imagine if someone came into my home and did not take my lifestyle or schedule or bandwidth into consideration and just said, do this, like, I'm not going to be successful. It's not going to be successful. Yep. Right. And that's not what we want. So yeah, there is definitely a collaborative piece to it, and right, being empathetic to our human learners, right? Because it's hard. I mean, I live with a dog with behavioral struggles, and I think people think, oh, well, you're a dog trainer, so that must be easy. And it's not. I understand the emotional tax it takes, or the emotional toll it takes. And yeah, I think that's another piece of it too, is really listening to our human clients and adapting, right? Sorting through all of the knowledge that we have, all of the pieces of the plan we can put together, and really fine tuning it to that individual.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like, that reminds me of like a few hats, right? Like one is detective, because you have to be a really good detective, right? You're asking a bunch of questions, you're making sure they're open-ended so that you can gather good information. And a detective gathers that information. And then once you have all that information, there's this moment of like being, I don't know if this is a hat, but like offering empathy, like you said, like, hey, this is hard. Like you're dealing with a lot of things right now, whether it's a new puppy or whether it is that you have like inter-household conflict, right? Hey, I understand that you feel overwhelmed and we're going to try our best to offer you some relief. And I want you to be part of those solutions, right? So yeah, there's all these other hats within working with the client that I think is like a huge priority, because if we don't work with the client, then the behavior change is not going to happen. Right.
Right. Yeah. It has to be doable, has to be attainable and realistic for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that depending on the client can be a breeze, or we've got to get creative and think outside of our box and really make a customized plan for that individual for them to be successful.
Yeah. Another hat that we wear that we came up with and is pretty funny is the interior decorator.
Yes. The fanciest hat. It's got feathers, maybe it's bedazzled, I don't know. But this is the hat we wear when we look at the environment. So we go into somebody's home, and if we have a behavior modification case, we might be setting up the environment so that to prevent the rehearsal of an undesirable behavior, or setting up the behavior so those behaviors that we do like and want to happen are easy for the dog. And sometimes it's really simple, right? Sometimes it's a baby gate or an X pen, and people, I feel like often clients feel very silly when we point something out like that. But when you're in it, and when you're in that environment every day, it's really hard to look at it objectively. And so that is a big one, looking at the environment and looking at what antecedents are causing a behavior. What can we change in the environment to make you more successful? So yeah, we get a little fancy and do some interior design. I specialize in baby gates and
frosting on your windows.
Yeah. Yeah.
We should all
window decal.
Yeah. Window decal. Yeah. We should all be like affiliates for the window treatments that come down from the top.
Yes.
Right. So you can have light in your house.
Yeah.
But you can still block the visual. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I like this idea. If there's anyone in the window treatment field listening, contact us. We would love to discuss a sponsorship. Or the frosted decal people. Those people as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, there's like some clients I'm thinking that, where that's part of the environment forever. And then there's some times where we're just making adjustments for a temporary period of time. But yeah, like when I think of an interior decorator, and I love that, actually Jenna came up with this. When I think of that, it's someone that's looking at the environment through this really critical eye and seeing how everything plays a role within each other, right? Like, how is the light coming into this room, and how, like, what colors are complementing one another in the space, right? Like they're creating a lovely, livable space. And that's what we are trying to do, but it is not with like lovely velvet cushions. It is with baby gates and whatever other management strategy we're using.
Maybe maybe that's something we can tap into, the velvet baby gate,
Yeah.
right? The brass mid-century modern baby
Yeah.
gate.
Yeah.
I'd buy one.
I'd buy one too, for
But
sure.
to be clear, I am guilty of the, right. It's hard to look at your own dog in your own space and see where those deficiencies or needs are. And sometimes it takes someone coming in who has that experience, right,
Mm-hmm.
to look at look at the environment and say, oh, well, why don't let's change this. And it does. I mean, I had it um with Ruben for his separation anxiety. You
Mm-hmm.
know, a huge piece of, I worked with Jackie Johnston of Leaving Your
Woohoo.
Dog, shout out to her. But a huge piece of his separation anxiety training was setting up the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't look at that objectively to notice that. Um, and it took a lot of fine tuning. Like, it wasn't just a let's let's do this and done. It was, well, let's try this. Okay, well, he's still struggling with this aspect of things, right? Okay, there's the um audible triggers that are setting him off. So we need to, right? It's not just visual stuff that
Mm-hmm.
we're also doing sound decor, audio
Yeah.
decor, um, audio engineering. Is
Yeah.
that another one?
That's
Audio
another hat. Okay.
engineers, yeah. Um, it was a lot of tweaking and testing and right. And someone could be like, oh, well, duh. Yeah, put a white noise machine on, close the blinds, Jenna. I didn't think of that.
Yeah. I so appreciate you bringing this up, Jenna, because I think as trainers, especially, I mean, I get caught up in my own dog as well, where I'm like, yeah, I need somebody else to talk to me about what is going on. And you're like, well, wait, I'm a professional, but no way, man. We are intertwined into
Yes.
this the same way that our clients are intertwined. And I love when a trainer reaches out and is like, hey, I'd love a second opinion because yeah, it's too emotional. Like it's,
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess my point is, if you have a trainer come to you and say, oh, let's put a baby gate to separate the dogs, like,
mm-hmm,
don't be embarrassed by that. It
mm-hmm,
like, we have a lot of practice, and um we've handled a lot of cases where this has
mm-hmm.
helped, and you don't have that learning history. So, if a trainer does come in and they're suggesting management that seems very simple and obvious, it wasn't to you, and it often isn't. So, um, when the interior director, oh my gosh, when the interior decorator hat is put on, um, just embrace it and be like, oh, thank gosh, something so simple is going to help me make progress.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot, for whatever reason, I feel like my clients always react sort of embarrassed to, like, oh, I don't know why I didn't think of that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really common reaction. It's like, well, this is my profession, right? So I should be able to give you a simple solution. And
Right.
I sort of want to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here in the sense of like, sometimes we can just add a throw pillow, right? We're totally like nailing this analogy, right? Sometimes we can just add a throw pillow. And
Yes.
sometimes that throw pillow doesn't work. So like you said, it's sort of trial and error, and we try a different throw pillow. We try a plan. Yes, exactly. Like we are
Plant.
trying management
Yeah.
strategies. And I guess there is sometimes where even the best management strategies, the case is really complex, right? The environment is really complex for everyone involved.
Yes.
And in a situation like that, that's where I feel like we are, well, one, we're creatives, right? Because we're trying to figure what else might be an alternative solution. But we're also like testers, right? Like we're like, okay, let's try this for mealtime. Let's try this for the day. Let's try this for a week, right? And we're almost like testers or experimenters. This is where we have to have harder, more honest conversations about, okay, we've tried all these things, we're hitting a ceiling. We might need to bring in another professional that might be a vet behaviorist, right? Like that, it's like when we sort of take it to the next level and add team members in, and
we're collaborators.
Oh, that's the word.
Is it?
Collaborators.
Yeah. We're collaborators.
Also, the word is like having an honest, like having a hard conversation. Like, yeah, our efforts have not worked. And this is really hard.
We're humble collaborators. I'm trying to think.
I like that.
Do you?
Yeah,
okay.
I like that. Humble collaborators. Yeah. Which I think can be really scary as a consultant or a trainer or a professional or someone charging anyone money, basically.
Yes.
When you're like, "Ooh, we have hit a ceiling and I need to have a hard conversation about like this environment is not working for a variety of reasons for everyone involved. What more can we do?"
We're ethical collaborators.
I like that.
Right? Like, I wouldn't want to go, and I'm not equating us to doctors, but I wouldn't want to go to a doctor that was trying to treat me and had run out of ideas and was just kept trying the same thing, or right? Like, I want someone who's like, hey, I have run out of options. I've run out of ideas, but I know this great doctor. I'd love to get his take on it. Like, I'm happy to give that doctor my money.
Yeah, that's so true.
But I'm not so eager to give the one that's just trying to save face at my expense, at my physical expense. Right.
Yeah. Which,
and monetary.
Yeah. Which is interesting because I have a few clients where I'm like, okay, so I talked to a few other trainers about this case, because a lot of the cases I get are really complex. Right. So I talked to another trainer and they're like, really? Thank you. I'm like, oh yeah, I can't do this alone. Like, especially when there's, when we're talking about really complex cases where there's a bunch of layers that we need to work on. Because no one calls at the beginning of these behavior concerns, right? So there's a bunch of layers that we have to understand, and we do that through our detective work, through our tester work, right? Like we sort of figure it out. But I love the idea and the analogy of the doctor, like you're talking about. It doesn't just like stop with them. It is that, okay, we've seemed to hit a ceiling. How are you feeling? I think we might need to bring in A, B, and C technique or A, B, and C professional, right? You're right. I would trust a doctor that works like that more than I would someone that's like, whoop, we did my 1, 2, 3 step process and that's it.
Yeah. Sorry,
you're out of luck.
You're out of luck. Yeah. Yeah. And there are aspects to behavior cases that we ethically can't touch either, right? Like if I think a dog is in pain, I'm not going to treat the pain. Yep. I need to collaborate with a vet. I need them to touch base with their veterinarian, or I can recommend a veterinarian, but I can't touch that. I am not licensed. It is not my area of expertise. So that's a piece of it too. That's part of the ethical collaboration of, there are aspects of these behavior cases that we literally need another person for.
In the lines of an ethical collaborator, right? When you're bringing people in, or whether you're talking to other professionals in the field, right? Like we also have to be really good listeners and observers. So all of that information is information that we would pass on to the person that we're collaborating with, right? And I'm thinking about when I think of a great listener, I'm thinking of somebody that listens carefully and attentively and sympathetically, that they are really, really, really present with the client, gathering as much information. So this is sort of like a cousin to the detective, right? They're gathering as much information to try to understand the speaker, and they're not they're actively present with them, and they're not thinking of like the next thing. Right. So being a really great listener of the person, but also being a really good observer of nonverbal body language from both the human and the dog, right? That we're observing the environment, like Jenna has been saying, in terms of the interior decorator. We're observing the dog's body language and what they're communicating. We're observing what the person's communicating and also what they're not saying. Like, I have an amazing coach that I work with. I'm her client. And she always says that I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm also listening to what you're not saying. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's freaking brilliant. So we're really trying to watch and observe and also listen to what the client is saying. And that is, that's something that I always feel like I have to remind myself to like pause, take a breath, and like allow the client, like their mind is really busy and they've got a lot of concern around the behavior issue. And it's like, let them have the floor for a bit so that they can be able to communicate that. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the one example that's incredibly simple, but often happens is if I go to a client and I bring out the clicker, and if they look at it and they're just like, ugh, like, right, they just deflate.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we don't have to use the clicker.
I'm not using the clicker.
Right. Yeah. Or we could talk about why, like maybe you had a past experience and learned to use it incorrectly, or maybe you simply don't understand it and are just overwhelmed by a thing to hold it, right? Like all valid things that,
or you have 3 kids and like, there's no way we're using a clicker.
Right. Yeah. Right.
With 3 kids.
100%. Right. And so, there's a lot of that needs to happen again to create and adapt a plan that is, easy for them, right? The training has to be doable for them. And if we're ignoring those subtle little signs of, right, or sometimes I'll say, okay, you're going to work on this. I've never said this to a client, but if I were to say like, okay, you're going to train 7 days a week and do whatever, and their eyes get big and you're overwhelmed by that. Okay, well, what's realistic, right? And have a conversation about what they can do, what they're able to do. So much of quote unquote dog training is people reading and understanding.
Yeah. Again, why we're like just dog training. It doesn't encompass.
Doesn't cover it.
It doesn't.
But I think a lot of people, right, there's this image of like dog trainer. I'm going to come in and boss you and boss your dog, and that's not it. And teach your dog to sit by bossing you guys around.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up, because I was going to mention that, you use the terms like force-free positive reinforcement training earlier, which you and I both subscribe to. And that doesn't stop with the dog, right? It's like,
right.
I'm thinking about the client that you were just saying that I know you have never done, where you're like, you're going to train 7 times a week. It's like, we're not like, if we're going to offer the dog agency, the dog control over their environment, we're going to use things that are appetitive to them, and we're going to reinforce their behavior. If we don't extend that kindness and that approach to our clients, like, we're in a little bit of a contrast or between like what we ethically stand by. I don't know if contrast is the right word, but we're like rubbing up against
conflict
something.
With it. Yeah.
Conflict. Yeah. And so, yeah, offering those to the client is just as important as offering that to the canine learner.
Yeah. And I think of clients who, will have a session and, okay, what do you think you're able to do this week? Or what seems like something that appeals to you to focus on? What exercises are really clicking for you? No pun intended. and feel really good. And if I see them the next week and they're like, oh my God, I wasn't able to da 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 da, you know, my knee jerk reaction every time is, oh, life happened, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, crazy. Like stuff came up. It never happens to me. But like, I can't imagine being like, okay, you need to really do that this week. Right. Like, how is that setting we don't do that with dogs. We don't
We don't do that with
so
dogs.
we can't do that with people. So yeah, we've got to offer that an agency, right? Like being able to pick and choose what's reinforcing for you to do, and how can I reinforce you? Like, hey, if you need some help motivating to do one training session with your dog for 5 minutes every day, like how can we make that desirable and reinforce it when you do?
Yeah. And the last hat we had was, and it's probably the most obvious one, is the weird teachers, right? That we are teaching people to learn, we are teaching dogs to learn. And I mean, we've discussed a variety of different ways in terms of how we do that through the other hats, but yeah, we are all teachers, which I remember when I was really young, I think it was like, I must have been 6 or 7 years old. And we had one of those, plays or recitals or what, like school assembly, and you had to dress up of what you wanted to be. And I remember dressing up as a teacher. Like I loved the chalkboard. Like I loved teaching. And I mean, I would say that that to me feels like that encompasses what we're doing more than dog trainer. Dog trainer feels like there is no agency. I'm barking orders at the dog. I'm just like telling you to do certain behaviors, where the teacher aspect, the liaison that we were talking about, the consultant, like all of that, there's a more collaborative approach than just dog trainer, tell a dog what to do. Right. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah,
about
I mean, again, I think it sort of is the all encompassing hat, right? We're teaching about your dog and what is normal dog behavior and how you can provide outlets for those normal behaviors, and how not having access to those right? Like again, it comes back to like teaching what is dog, and then we're teaching you how the dog learns, right? Like we're teaching learning theory, we're teaching how to, what motivates your dog, and how, right? Like just the stuff that is sort of second nature to us is really, I think, fascinating to people, to varying degrees. But if you're a good teacher, you're inspiring them to gain more knowledge. I have some clients who at this point I'm like, you could be a trainer yourself, right? Because that learning sort of fueled their fire to learn more. Wow, there's so much I didn't know about dog, and I would like to learn more about dog. And wow, I taught my dog how to do this, and right, we're teaching them how to teach, and that then inspires them to teach their dog more. And we've essentially taught them how to have a beautiful collaborative relationship with their dog.
Yeah. I heard someone say, like, I love the inspiration behind all that, right? Like where you're now your client can be a dog trainer, which, we have some clients that are dog trainers now, right?
I mean, I am a self-proclaimed dog nerd, right? Like I think of my teachers in school that really lit a fire under my butt and got me really excited about topics that maybe initially I didn't think were very interesting. And like, yeah, they were nerds about their subject, right? They were really into it. They were really passionate about it. And I feel like, good trainers are really passionate about it. And, we don't want to overwhelm our, right? We have to find that balance of like taking our all the knowledge that we've learned and presenting it in digestible form for someone who's new to it, but doing so in a way that also is exciting for them, right? And wow, I had no idea. Oh, this is why my dog is always doing that. I've been living with him for
Yeah.
years and I had no idea. And this one little piece of information shed light on that and helps me understand my dog so much more. Like, give me more, right? Like, what else can you teach me? And I think that helps them enjoy the training process too.
Yeah. There's another hat in there that is like, concise analogy maker, right? Because when you just said digestible information, because you're right. Like, I remember learning stuff and being like, I can't wait to tell everyone all the things that I know. Right. And you start to like spew out the information that you learn, and that's like, for me as an extrovert, I process by speaking out loud. Right. So, but our clients didn't pay us to hear like the dissertation on A, B, and C topic. Right. So yeah, doing this and like digestible. I love that word, concise, efficient, and making analogies, right? Like I've heard so many good analogies from dog trainers and behavior consultants that like really help the client be in the shoes or the paws of the dog, right? So that they're like, oh, that's why it's happening, right? So
yes,
we concise analogy makers.
Yeah, and they're really important. It's funny that this came up because I dug up the archives of some of my handouts from when I first started training. And there were some terms in there. I was like, oh man, you were really excited when you learned about this and you really wanted to share your knowledge, but this is so like boring and irrelevant to your learner. Like,
so funny.
But you were clearly very pumped. Excited about this new thing. Yeah. And wanted to share it with the world. So yeah, but I have fortunately developed that skill because now my handouts are hopefully a bit more entertaining and a little less technical. And yeah. Look at this new word I learned. I'm going to share it with you.
Well, we have just listed off a ton of hats.
And I honestly, they don't cover all the hats. I mean, you could have a closet full of hats if you're a dog trainer.
Yeah. And I'd actually love to hear from listeners in terms of the hats that we miss. Like, we didn't even go into, because this hat is a little, I mean, this is not our lane, but we didn't even go into like, if you're working with families, you're working with a system of people, right? And understanding, like, I don't usually take on cases with a lot of younger children, and there's some trainers out there that like understand development of children to the best of their ability. And they are bringing some of that education and knowledge into the situation, right? Like there's a lot of other elements that we didn't even bring into this conversation that I'd love listeners, if you are out there and you're like, oh, I wear this hat all the time, message me on Instagram. I'd love to know, or shoot me an email.
Or if you had a picture of what a dog trainer was in your head, I would love to know that. Like, what did you think?
Are you mind blown that like there's a lot that goes into this?
Yeah.
So just reach out regardless, because this is a topic that I think needs to be spoken about a bit more, especially because it not only it really validates the work that we're doing and how complex it can be at times. And it is also really helps set realistic expectations for our clients. Okay. So Jenna, where can folks find you online?
I am most active on Instagram at Think Smart Dog Training. I've also recently resurrected my Facebook page, so I am on there. Just search for Think Smart Dog Training. And then if you're interested in snuffle mats, I have my little side gig doing that, and those are at thinksmartpets.com.
Yeah, they're the best snuffle mats because they're like thick snuffle mats.
Oh yeah.
Like they're so like,
they were born of my frustration with the flat snuffle mat.
yes, they are so good. Love them.
Thank you.
So we'll link to all of Jenna's stuff in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here and having this conversation.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
The theme music is called Sunny, provided royalty-free from bensound.com. The audio is mixed and edited by James Eady at beheard.org.uk.